Welcome, grade 7s. This is chapter 14, lesson 14.2. How have we created greater diversity in Canada through our immigration policies? We're looking at immigration again and the policies and how they have changed over time up to today. So stick around and let's learn something. Lesson 14.2 today. How have we created greater diversity in Canada through our immigration policies? We first heard about immigration policy a few chapters back when we were talking about John A. Macdonald's national policy, the three-pronged approach to speeding up Canada's transportation, immigration, and economic policies, the three-pronged approach that existed there. Today we're going to focus on a diverse society. And we know, it's modern times, the world is not a static place. We're not just sitting in our countries. People are moving from country to country. This is called immigration. This is one of your vocabulary words. And it's common for people to move. People move because of job opportunities or families, or they are refugees and they have to leave or flee their country. There's all kinds of reasons why people are constantly on the move. And now, more than ever before, it's been easier to do these things. They're coming to Canada, and we know that our First Nations and our Inuit have also been in the land before, in the land we call Canada, before we even called it Canada. And over time, people from around the world, they made their way into Canada to call Canada home, and all of our people living in Canada are contributing to Canadian society. And we have always been and always will be a diverse society. Right from our First Nations and our Inuit, we were a diverse place here in North America. As immigrants came over, they added to this complex diversity that already existed. The majority of the people from the colonization era to the end of the Second World War were either French or British. Now, other nations were immigrating over, and we learned about that in previous lessons, but the majority were French and British. The French and the British see themselves as the founders of modern Canada, and for that, it has always been considered for the longest time Canada to be a bicultural country because of the French and the English. But a new immigration policy emerged in the 1960s, where immigration from Western Europe began to decline. And we've been talking about immigration from other parts of the world. We spoke of China, we spoke of Eastern Europe and places like that. But the majority of our immigrants were still Western European, but that started to change. And the government was looking and paying very close attention to this change in immigration and determined that our economy would fail if immigration did not increase. Canadian families are just not having enough children to be able to populate the country and to be able to fill all the needs that are needed in our country. So our economy would ultimately fail if something didn't happen. Either Canadians need to have more babies, more children, to then soon later enter the workforce, or we need to bring in immigration. So Canada made it easier for citizens from other countries to immigrate, and they introduced a point system here that rates each applicant. So you right now need a point minimum eligibility points of 67 points, and your categories that rate each applicant come from education. You can get a maximum of 25 points. Let's say, for example, you have your doctorate, you have a PhD, you would get the maximum 25 points. And then it goes lower as your degrees are of less value, I guess, is the word that we would use. Then it looks at your adaptability in English and or French, where you get a maximum of 28 points. Your work experience, what kind of, how many years have you been working? Have you been working, 5 years? If you've been working 5 years, you'll get 13 points. Takes a look at your age. Ultimately, Canada wants between the ages of 18 and 35. You would get the maximum points there, and you would reduce points over the age of 35. You would get no points if you're under 18. Do you already have arranged employment? The chart here says Nova Scotia, but this is arranged employment anywhere in Canada. That will be a maximum of 10 points. Your adaptability, do you already have family here? Is there somebody here that can help you? That is going to give you a maximum of 10 points. There's a maximum of 100 points total that you can get. And right now, the Canada points table is sitting at a minimum eligibility ranking of 67 points. So take a look at this image that's here on the bottom. Would you yourself right now qualify to come into Canada? Probably not. You would be probably shy by a few points. Nonetheless, though, this point system is introduced to attract adult immigrants, and that's exactly what happens. The immigration numbers begin to increase, and they increased because of the Immigration Act of 1978 in response to the economic boom that was taking place in the 1960s and the 1970s, when Canada said that it needed more immigrants to come to the country. And that Immigration Act of 1978, they wanted to attract skilled workers and educated, very well educated immigrants. They wanted to reunite families. Maybe there was already a family member here who got in and was working. Well, the Immigration Act of 1978 wanted to bring the rest of the family over. You bring more family over, the person that's currently here in Canada will send less money to their family overseas if that family is here in Canada, which means more money is spent here in our economy. They began to accept refugees, and they allowed for quicker citizenship to take place. And all of this leads to multiculturalism. Because we have more immigrants, we have more diversity, we are no longer a bicultural country. We're no longer French and English. We are a multicultural country. And in 1971, that's when the policy of multiculturalism was introduced by the government. In that policy, it recognized that Canada is made up of people from many different backgrounds, many different cultures. They helped citizens protect and enhance their cultures, so the government would pay for like festivals, for example, or first language classes even, to maintain their culture, to maintain their heritage. And it promoted respect and equality for all. Taking a look at the table that's here, the majority of our immigrants, the source countries of our immigrants, the majority are coming from Asia and the Pacific nations. They make up just under 50% of our immigrants. Once the leader of immigration, Western Europe and the United Kingdom right now is making up 18%. And the United States is even on there, where 3% of our immigrants come from the United States. And the Immigration Act of 1978 comes before the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now that we have such a diverse country, it's time to take a look at all Canadian citizens as a whole and ensure that they have the same rights throughout Canada. And that was instilled in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982, and in a few years' time, you will be dissecting this document in grade 9 social studies. Couple of things about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It gives citizens, Canadian citizens, certain rights, and we'll go through those rights now. There's a lot, but I've picked a few here. You have the right to vote in elections. You have the right to belong to any organization. You have the right to a fair trial. You have the right to practice any religion. You have the right to run for political office, and you have the right to move freely and to work anywhere within Canada. But it also went a step further, and it also granted collective rights. So these are rights that are pertaining specifically to our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. This is Section 82 of the Charter. And Section 23 of the Charter grants collective rights protecting the education of official, so that's French and English, official language minorities. And this came in response, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms came in response because in Canada's past, we didn't always treat our citizens with the same rights. And we're going to take a look at the Second World War as our example here. And this is an example before the Charter of Rights and Freedoms became law, some of the things that Canada did to Canadians living here in Canada. We're going to take a look at Japan first. During the Second World War, Japan was an enemy of Canada. Approximately 23,000 Japanese Canadians lived in BC, mainly along the coast. The government of Canada suspected that Japan might attack Canadian soil, so they forced these Japanese Canadians living in BC into work camps in the BC interior, in Alberta, and in Ontario. The government of Canada promised the Japanese Canadians that all of their property, all of their businesses, and all of their belongings would be safe because this is going to be just a temporary measure until the war ends. So they promised to take care of all of the belongings and property of the Japanese. But the Canadian government turned around and sold off all of these properties and all of these belongings that were of these Japanese Canadians when they went to these camps. Ukraine was also an enemy during the war, but this is during the First World War when they were with Austria-Hungary. And the Canadian government was worried, and the newspapers that the Ukrainians had here in Canada were banned, same with magazines. 5,000 Ukrainians were sent to camps where they were poorly fed and they were forced to work long hours in the logging mills and steel mills and in mines. And they did all this with zero pay. They got no pay for the time that they spent inside these work camps. Now we've got the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Can't do this. In 1988, Canada goes and apologizes to the Japanese Canadians, and the government sets up a fund to repay them for that sold property that they sold off during the Second World War. For our Ukrainians, they got their apology from the Canadian government in 2005. And although the Canadian government did not sell off their property during the First World War, the government does set up a fund. And the fund is set up to sponsor projects that recognize the contributions that Ukrainians made to Canada. All right, I want you to head over to your notebooks and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.